Hello, welcome back to Learn It from a Layman. I recognize that in our last podcast, I didn't actually introduce my brothers and slash co-hosts. Um, it's not just because I was being selfish. It's also because I was offended that nobody commented on our recent change in introduction music. So I was distracted by that. But I am joined by Cameron Christensen and Matt Christensen. So thank you. And today we're going to be discussing car maintenance, which is a big departure from our more academic subjects in the past for the last little while. This is actually listener requested. And I happen to know the listener that requested it, and he happens to be in charge of my paycheck. So, turns out those people have higher priority in my list of potential podcast topics. So car maintenance moved right to the top, and while we don't have a lot of knowledge on this subject, we have some knowledge. Cameron, I think you took a class in like high school, didn't you?
Yes.
Right. And I have changed a tire before, and yeah, anyway, and Matt owns a car or two. So, lots of real world experience here. We're going to talk first though about oil changes, because that's something that everyone knows they need to do to their car or with their car or extract from their car somehow. And we're going to talk a little bit first about how frequently you need to have an oil change. So Cameron or Matt, what is the layman's experience with oil changes?
Well, doing it yourself or going somewhere?
Well, both.
Well, doing it yourself is a little bit harder. Still not very hard. Some of the new cars are harder to do. But when I was doing most of this stuff myself, I would just pull my car up on a set of ramps where you can pull it up on a curb, depending how small you are. And then you just need a wrench, a oil pan catch, a filter, and about 4 quarts of oil.
And about like 20 minutes for a layman. Like it's not a long job, right?
I would say give yourself like a half hour. Yeah. Just
Now here's the real question though, and this is going to be a question throughout. It's going to be a theme of this podcast. Let's say, so half an hour, and all of those things that you just mentioned, which all cost money, or you have an oil change at the mechanics, which is these days what, like $30?
Keep going.
Is it more than that? Well, I mean, you can pay as much. Okay, if you're getting full synthetic, and which we'll talk about synthetic versus regular oil in a minute. But if you're getting full synthetic, then sure, then you're paying like $80 or $90 for an oil change.
I would say
if you're just
depends where you go. I would say between $30 to $70 for a basic oil change.
Right.
Just depends where you go.
Right. And now, and not a lot of that is for labor, right? Because for them, it's also an incredibly quick job. So a lot of that really does just go for the supplies, like the oil costs a certain amount. So the question for the layman generally is this really worth my time to do it myself? What's your opinion on that, Cameron or Matt?
I would say, do you have the tools, and how much time do you have? Because if you have the tools, I think it's way better to do it yourself.
Yeah, and I would
I
agree
think it's going to be up to the individual circumstances. There is definitely a learning curve. When Cameron suggests allocate half an hour, I would suggest for your first time you allocate maybe 2 hours, and you'll learn from there. And it is a kind of question of how valuable is my time versus how valuable is the convenience. Some people enjoy working on things for the fulfillment of working on them, and the value of time is not so much a question as the value of the fulfillment. Other people don't like to have to deal with petroleum spills on their driveway, and so the value for them comes in having someone else deal with that kind of mess.
Right. And that's something that's like a theme as we go talk about. We're going to talk a lot about like mechanic versus do-it-yourself type projects, and that's like at least in my experience, and especially with cars and oil change, maybe not as much as some of the other things we'll get into, but like you get into a project, and this is like your mode of transportation. If something goes wrong, you're kind of up a creek, almost literally without a paddle. So it is, like there you do have to weigh it against the amount of time that you have and your comfort level of doing these types of projects, and whether or not if you blew something up in your car, you have some alternative method of transportation until you fixed it. Like I said, an oil change really isn't that bad. Like Cameron said, it's just like one tool, a filter, some new oil, and like maybe worst case scenario, like Matt said, a couple hours if something went catastrophically wrong, which maybe if you unscrewed the wrong part.
Well, if you don't know where your parts are, that's what usually takes
that's
longer. True. So
that's what YouTube's for. So.
Yeah.
So I am going to do what they generally will ask, like if you're going to change your, I'm going to do another $8 there. So I just went on to Walmart and just looked at prices. What would be 5 quarts of standard oil is $3.
Wow.
An oil
quart,
filter.
Right?
No, for 5 quarts is $3.
Oh,
wow.
Right.
That's incredible.
An oil filter is about $5, and an air filter is about $8. So you can do an oil change yourself for $16 if you have the knowledge.
And
Right.
after your initial investment in some heavy steel ramps and tools and other things.
So yeah, if you have the socket wrench, tools, and your oil catch, which is an initial investment, I would say probably around $50. After that, you start making up the money. So
Right. Yeah, and I do think so. One thing, there is something to be said for just familiarity with your car and the parts of your car, so that when things go wrong, you can at least figure out if it's worth your time to try to fix it. And starting with an oil change and being familiar with where oil would drip out if you were leaking oil or something like that, those types of things are valuable. So, but yeah, it is something to be considered as far as initial startup costs as well, like getting ramps and any tools that you might need. But okay, well, let's not belabor the oil change. Well, another question that I think laymen like myself have frequently are how frequently do I need to change my oil? Like the conventional wisdom is like every 3,000 miles or something. But
5,
as soon as you Google that,
5,000.
right, is that that's bogus? And then is it 5,000? Is it 7,000? How frequently do I need to change my oil? Cameron, Matt, do you guys know?
Well, with a basic oil that's not a synthetic, it's about 5,000 miles. It actually really depends on the oil's brand. Each brand has a specific lifetime that goes through, but they've all generalized it to about 5,000 for your basic. A full synthetic, you can go between $7,000 to $10,000, if I remember, or not dollars, miles. Right. 7,000 to 10,000 miles.
Yeah, that's kind of what I found out too. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
If I may add a disclaimer, oil is one of the more critical fluids for your car. If you do not have sufficient oil or sufficiently viscous oil, it is one of the things that can kill your car dead and irreparably dead. You can lose your engine for it. So, yes, you can go longer, but one, learn it from a layman, and all of us, especially because Carl keeps giving you our names, are in no ways responsible for you destroying your car because you didn't change your oil often enough. And two, find a mechanic or an oil change place that you trust and go with their recommendations, whether you use them at their frequency or whether you do it yourself at their frequency. I would, follow the appropriate professional's recommendation on this. Even if we are completely right on the podcast, and Cameron probably is, I would tend to err on the side of the professionals just because of the magnitude of consequence.
It
I would
certainly matters.
I would
Yeah,
say
go
go
ahead.
on the recommended thing from the manufacturer of your car, not
Right.
necessarily by the mechanic, because they're trying to make a living. Go with the recommendation from your car's manufacturer.
Yeah, and those are usually in the manual, so you can usually look that up. Um,
And to
yeah,
be fair, helping mechanics make a living is not a bad thing.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying there are
Point
people that
taken.
have been going into
yeah, their
in,
incentive is to get you to spend more, not less. Um, yeah, so and finding a mechanic that you trust can also be difficult, which is something I want to bring up later as well. However, I did, as I was looking, doing some research for this, I did find that changing your oil too frequently can actually be problematic as well. Turns out that if you leave it for just a little bit longer, sometimes that's better. Apparently, somehow, like I said, I'm not particularly knowledgeable on that subject, but um, I'm not saying 10,000 miles is preferable to 5,000 miles, but 5,000 miles being more preferable than changing it every 3,000 miles. Um, and I don't understand necessarily the science behind it, but that's what I found when I was looking it up. So, but yeah, if you're doing regular oil, like Cameron said, yeah, 5,000 miles or so ish. And synthetic, so regular versus synthetic oil is the idea. So synthetic is obviously manufactured oil. It's got different molecules in it that don't break down as quick, or at least don't break down as quickly as oil, as conventional oil does. And so that's why it can last a lot longer. That's also why it costs a lot more. So a synthetic oil is at least twice as much, I believe, per quart as a regular oil, a conventional oil will be. So, but if it gets you twice as many miles, then maybe it's worth it. But once again, I believe the engine, the manufacturer, your car manufacturer will have recommendations for doing a synthetic versus a conventional oil, so probably worth looking into that. Now, if you just have some old clunker, right, some old beater car, you just need to get it around. I've heard that my mechanic, my original mechanic, who I have abandoned since then, was telling me you can't ever change. You can never change between synthetic and crude. And I think that is the conventional wisdom. And then I did research on it. And from my understanding is that's not true. It's not true anymore, at least. You actually can switch. And so there's nothing particularly wrong with switching if you just have some old beater car and you just need to keep it alive and you're like, well, can I just save some money by putting conventional oil in? And the answer is yes. It won't be, like I said, as high quality, but my understanding is that there's no particular reason to invest more money in a higher quality oil if this is a car that you just need for around town simple and you just need to do it on a shoestring budget. Matt or Cameron, do you
yeah.
have any experience with that?
My auto mechanic teacher said the same thing. You can switch between different oils. It's not wise to mix oils, like if you add a synthetic to a non-synthetic.
Okay. Sure.
That could be what he was talking about. But
Yeah, maybe you're
between
right. Well, I
oil
don't think so.
changes, that's okay.
My old mechanic. We'll talk about him a little later.
Anyway,
He had issues.
but it is true. Just kind of a little bit. You can't switch between standard and synthetic brake fluid. Once you switch to a synthetic brake fluid,
Oh, right.
you can't
Yes.
use a standard brake fluid anymore because it will cause bubbles and all sorts of problems. So
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
that is one thing you can't switch in between. So
Got it.
it's
Okay, so we have established, though, that if you're getting an oil change, like Cameron said, maybe you don't dump synthetic oil in on top of conventional oil if you're just adding some oil to your car. If you're getting an oil change and you want to switch from a synthetic to regular or vice versa, there shouldn't necessarily be any issues with that. Obviously, once again, if you got a nice car or if this is a car you're trying to maintain for a long time, look up the
yeah.
recommendation.
Some cars are
Sure.
requiring a full synthetic. Like a Prius requires a full synthetic oil.
Right.
And if you really guys want to know the difference, next time you go into your tire shop or something like that, most of the time they have like what the difference is on the counter, like with some gears with conventional oil and a synthetic oil. And you can see the difference. It's pretty clear what happens.
Right. So I will be the voice of caution and paranoia again. You should always trust whatever you listen to by unprofessional, unskilled laymen on internet podcasts. But more than that, you really probably should find a mechanic you trust, and in general, go with their recommendations. Again, if it's a mechanic you trust, find a mechanic you trust. Find a mechanic you can trust. So.
Right. Well, but part of getting to trust a mechanic is the ability to be able to check what they're saying against some standard of truth, I believe.
Right. And indeed, learn it from a layman has always striven to be that standard of truth.
Well, in as much
as
we do try
only
to be that
what it
standard
is worth and no more than it is worth.
Well, luckily in this day and age where reviews are extremely prominent on places, it's a little bit harder to be a shady mechanic now because people will call you out on that.
I said, I found an instance of one of those despite reviews. So, okay, let's move on to gas octane now. So this is something, once again, you're presented with this option literally every time you pull up to a gas pump. And generally you just go with the cheap stuff. At least that's me, right? You just, what's the cheap stuff?
That's what you were raised on.
What?
So that's what you were raised on.
Exactly. Well, can I go with the cheap stuff? And if I can, if it makes my car go, I will go with the cheap stuff. Now, so what is gas octane, and why are there different varieties of gas octane? Cameron or Matt, do you have any insight here before I talk about the little bit of research I did?
A little bit. The octane is basically the combustion, like where it bursts into flame.
Right.
So a higher octane, you're going to have a higher combustion point, which is going to give you a higher horsepower and make your engine burn hotter and such versus a lower octane.
Right.
Your high octanes, where people race and do stuff like that, they actually go get jet fuel from the airport and places like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Right. So yeah, the one definition, it's pretty much that. I mean, that's a good definition Cameron just gave us. It says that what I looked up, it says a higher octane rating indicates greater resistance to knock, which is the early combustion of the fuel air mixture that causes cylinder pressure to spike. So essentially, yeah, if you got a higher octane, it will not combust as early, which is good because you want the temperature to go higher for it to combust. And so yeah, it's going to burn hotter, which is good for like that horsepower and things like that.
Another way to think of it is the piston reaches its maximum height with a higher octane versus it trying to combust sooner, which what causes the knock. That's your piston being hit before it reaches its full height.
Right. Matt, were you saying something?
No, you guys hit it. In general, fuels with higher combustion temperatures, regardless of engine type, are going to provide more energy per reaction than a fuel with the burning at a lower temperature. You just get more energy out of it, so that's where you get the higher horsepower ratings as well.
Right. Yeah, and so I'm sure this is relevant in like rocket fuel, and it's certainly relevant in race cars, those types of things. I'm sure octane of the fuel matters greatly. But if you're listening to our podcast, you're probably not in the NASCAR circuit, and there's a good likelihood you're also not launching a rocket, though we do have those podcasts as well.
Wow, way to shame the audience.
Well, just saying the likelihood. I'm not saying that we don't have an above average listener base. I'm just saying the percentage.
Maybe we don't. Listeners, please comment if you feel that you're an above average or below average person with us. And
Okay, but what does it mean for day to day? Like I'm driving my
Like, are you
Ford.
going to put in your 85, your 87, or your 91 octane?
Right, and yeah, I've got some 2005 vehicle that's got 200,000 miles on it. Doesn't matter if I'm putting 93 octane in versus 87 or something like that. Um, and the short of it is no, it doesn't matter. Um, I mean, the difference in fuel economy at freeway speeds, from what my research here, is marginal at best. We're talking like if you get like 27 miles per gallon at freeway speeds with your 87 octane, um, that's the low stuff, right? That's the cheap stuff, and then you want to
85's
go
the
up to
cheap.
like
Yeah.
the premium stuff. You're going to go from like 27 miles per gallon to maybe, if you're lucky, 27 and a half miles per gallon. And when the price difference is usually like 30 or 40 cents per gallon, or more, that doesn't compute. The numbers don't work out there. It's not worth your money to get the higher octane stuff. If you're, once again, just driving your car around the road, it will give you slightly better horsepower, but most of us aren't flooring it going from 0 to 60, those types of things. So if you're just worried about fuel economy, there's no point in getting higher octane gas. Now, once
Now,
again, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, now, if you're worried about engine life and amount of
Thank you.
plaque that's going to build up, for lack of a better term, from the lower octane, you might want to go a higher octane because it burns hotter and burns cleaner.
Yeah.
Also,
Well,
most cars have a preferred octane rating in your owner's manual.
Yeah, actually, it's usually also just right there on your gas cap. As you open the fuel door, there's often a sticker inside that says fill with some sort of gasoline octane rating only. And that's the
Yeah.
manufacturer recommendation. Now, you talk about engine life, and basically, when you have your piston moving around, if your fuel is combusting before the piston reaches its maximum point, I mean, Cameron, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there is going to be a mechanical strain that is greater on that piston and on its on its mechanics, on its linkages, than there would be if the piston was at its optimum position. And so when you have a higher octane fuel that is combusting later because it has to reach that higher temperature, your piston gets to that optimal position if it's designed correctly, and your engine doesn't see that same mechanical strain every time it fires. And over tens of millions of cycles, that can add up to reduced or extended engine life, depending on what you're doing. Now, in Carl's scenario, where for some reason he's still driving a car manufactured in 2005, it probably doesn't matter. The thing has endured for this many years, and it can be expected to continue to endure because it's probably immortal at this point. But if you have a new car and you want it to last longer, then going with the manufacturer's recommended octane rating may be a good idea. Unless you're planning on trading it out in 2 years and you just want to enjoy it while you've got it and get the most out of it without paying the most for it, then by all means, burn it up and then sell it.
There you go.
That's
yeah.
But if you're buying a new car, maybe we should also talk about, you actually need to let your cars warm up for about the first 5,000 miles when you're driving it.
Yeah, we'll get to that one.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, once again, if there's a recommendation or even a requirement of your car that says, requires premium gas or whatever, then probably go with it, because you probably paid an amount of that for that car that is worth spending the extra on gas in order to keep that car alive longer and performing well longer.
Yeah. So no, that reminds me. It's I don't know if anybody, if you guys watched Ford versus Ferrari at all. You can let me know if you did or not.
Did.
You did. It's when the mechanic was talking to the guy and said, "You're not driving that like a sports car." Like you're not getting it to the right RPMs before you're shifting would actually cause that car problems. So it's kind of the same thing. If you bought a performance car that's for racing and speed, you're probably going to have a higher octane rating that you're going to be using because it's designed to do those things.
Right, and for the sake of being environmentally friendly as well, I believe higher octane gas decreases the emissions of the car. This is once again my understanding.
I don't know, but I could Google it.
Anyway, but yeah, so once again, I think the vast majority of people out there are driving a car that is more of a mode of transportation than it is a a performance vehicle, and they are far more interested in doing so on a budget. So then,
Ricky Bobby in the live comments says, "Fight me."
Wait, who said that?
Never mind.
Okay. I don't think we have a lot of high-rolling listeners, but if we do, we need to tap into that. So, guys, we're going to need to, start finding ways to eke some money out of our listeners. Anyway, but the reality is most people are driving cars around and need to do so on a budget and don't have extra money to sink into it. And it turns out for most vehicles, driving on your just your regular gas is not going to cause any problems. So do look into your specific model of car if you are, and then if you're looking to buy a new one, look into that as well. See, how is this going to perform on regular gas versus premium? So, okay, moving on now to tires.
That was a good segue because I was going to say one of the things that actually affects your how many miles you get to the gallon is your tire pressure.
Sure.
Whether it's inflated or underflated. So
that is for sure true. All right, so let's talk a little bit about tires first. Tires can be, the range in tire cost is significant, either per vehicle and even with a specific vehicle from the low end all the way to the top end. Easily, you can double how much you spend on tires if you go for a top end tire. So, what kind of tires do you guys use on your vehicles, Matt and Cameron, and what do you recommend? What some experiences you've had with buying tires, good or bad?
I'm not the person to ask because I consistently have poor results with tires.
Lately, that could be your driving.
Well, shut up. No, it can't. Lately, we have started to not buy the bottom of the line cheap tire, and shockingly enough, our tires have actually lasted longer.
Weird.
Yeah, I know. There is very much you get what you pay for here. You definitely can get cheap tires that will perform adequately for a period of time. Right. One of the things that I found early on, and I was kind of dense that I didn't realize this beforehand, tires come with a warranty, right? So however many thousand miles, 40,000, 50, 60, 70,000 sometimes.
Right.
Well, it turns out that if your tire wears out before you hit that 40,000 mile mark, they don't just replace your tire free. They prorate it, meaning that they give you the value of the tire as a fraction of how much ground you actually covered. So if you drive 30,000 miles and your tires are shot, they give you 1/4 of the value of your tire. 30,000 being 3/4 of 40,000. So be aware that is how tire warranties work. A very quick and dirty look at the quality of the tire could be the length of the physical distance of the warranty that goes with it. A tire warranted to 70,000 miles is probably a pretty decent tire and is going to last longer and better than a tire warranted to 40,000 miles.
Yeah, fully agree. And that's That is important to recognize. And once again, this is one of those scenarios where if you're only worried about the money that you have right now, sometimes you make the bad decision for long-term, price. So, because 40,000 mile tires are going to be cheaper than 75,000 mile tires, except that if you look at the prices and think about the relationship between miles and price, it turns out the 75,000 mile tire might be cheaper over the long run. So, that's I believe that's something I've invested a little bit more in my. But now the other consideration is, where do you live? Because if you live somewhere where it snows a lot, you're going to need better quality tires. If somewhere where it rains a lot, you can't afford to hit the brakes and have your tires skid, so you need to buy higher quality all weather tires versus some tires that are just made for Southern California, where I live, where it rains like 1 month a year and then not again until the next February. So our tires are not that important, other than obviously just the mileage. But Cameron lives where it snows. Cameron, what do you do for tires?
Well, what I do is I buy an all-season tire. It's usually about a 50 to 60,000 mile warranty. I know it's a little bit on the cheaper side, but don't have a lot of money always to spend on my tires.
Yep. I think that's pretty frequent. That's a scenario a lot of people are in.
Because for my car, an average tire I think is about $120, maybe a little bit more. Then it just kind of depends on the place that I go. Sometimes I'll go to a place where it's a little bit more. I'm spending maybe $150 if I go to like Pep Boys. But then if you buy a set of tires, you get the fourth one for free. So evens out a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, there are fees usually also in regards to getting a tire changed at a particular place. So just get a full quote when you're going to go get it. And it's also worth looking into, do I need two tires? Do I need 4 tires? So, Cameron, that's something you brought up before our podcast here. What?
Oh, yeah. If you have a vehicle with an all-wheel drive, it's highly recommended. You don't have to, but it is highly recommended that you change out all 4 tires because of the way the driving system works on those cars. It actually hurts the car if you don't. So if you have like an all-wheel drive car, it tends to be a little bit more expensive, but also generally tire manufacturers understand that if you have that type of car, they sell them a little bit cheaper. They sell them cheaper because when you have one thing that goes wrong, you have to replace all 4. So it's not as big of a hit. Maybe it's like $100 cheaper or something like that. But
yeah. So front wheel drive cars, I believe it's usually the front tires that usually go out. They're the ones that are getting, when you hit the accelerator, those are the ones that are getting pulled violently. So
there's some other factors, and we should probably talk about alignment too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But to what Cameron was saying, the reason that you want to change all 4 tires on a 4-wheel drive, and the reason that you want to change both drive tires on a 2-wheel drive, is because if you consider the way that the forces in your car run from engine through axles to the tire, every point in there's some kind of load. And in your engine, it starts with your high octane burst of flame and fire moving that piston, and it ends with your tire on the pavement and the friction load between the tire and the pavement. Now, if your tires are worn out unevenly and one tire has better grip than the other tire, well, you're going to get a different friction load on one side versus the other side, and that will translate to an unbalanced load throughout the entire drivetrain. That's why it's so important to change both tires at the same time so that you avoid those unbalanced loads and the stresses that they put on your car and the safety hazard that it is when your car is trying to apply a force that should be equal and it ends up not being equal because the tires are not gripping the same because one of them is old and the other is not. And that extends to all four tires in the four-wheel drive, as Cameron said.
All-wheel
Yeah.
drive.
All-wheel
well,
drive.
yes, not four-wheel drive. That's separate topic.
Right. Yeah, well, like Matt was just saying, also the alignment of your car matters. If your wheels are misaligned, they're going to cause uneven wear on your tires, and you're going to need to replace them prematurely because there'll be different wear patterns on your tires.
Yeah, that's actually one that, in addition to changing your tires, highly recommend anytime you get a tire change, and once a year after that, get a four-wheel alignment. And what the alignment does is it just makes sure that the tires are in correct parallel planes with each other and perpendicular to the ground. If you can imagine looking at your tire head on, it should be perfectly straight up and down, right? Well, what if it was tilted, wobbled to the right or the left? What if it was skewed outward so that it was towed out or towed in? Well, what that translates to is essentially, it's uneven wear patterns. If you can imagine your tires being towed out away from each other while you drive, you'll still move forward, but what you're also doing is effectively dragging your tire horizontally down the road. That will very quickly erode it. So anytime you do an alignment, you're buying not only a little bit of extra safety, but you are going to vastly enhance the life of your tire versus having it unaligned.
Yeah, and now my understanding is that, so I have a friend who does lots of do-it-yourself projects on his car and has also helped me a lot with my car. He's the reason I have any understanding of my car beyond put the key in the ignition and turn it. And so he was helping me a little while ago with an issue with my control arms of my vehicle. Anyway, yeah, he does a lot of different things. Anyway, but he was saying, look, if we replace the control arms, and those are the things that actually connect your tire to your axle, he said, then you're going to need an alignment, and he said, do it yourself alignments are not usually good. He said, take those in, get an alignment at the shop. He's like, it's worth it. He's like, I never try to align my tires myself. It just doesn't usually go well because it's hard. And they have special tools for it at the shop that you don't generally have at home. He said you can do a string alignment in your garage where you get a string and you can look it up on YouTube.
And you measure it, yeah. But yeah, you take it to the
This is
shop.
a very bad idea. Don't do it.
They
Right,
have a
well, that's
computer
essentially what he
that
was saying.
aligns it. Yeah, they have a computer that you pull up and it will tell you exactly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They've
your-
got specialized
your
tools.
tilter and everything like that. So.
And when you are doing an alignment, you're looking at, three separate planes of alignment here where fractions of degrees can make significant differences in the wear on your tire. Things that you're not really going to be able to measure with standard analog tools or string. You do need computer-controlled instruments that a professional garage is going to have. So yeah, definitely take your car in for alignment.
Yeah, so that's one that's worth investing the money in and not worth trying to do it yourself. So unless you happen to be a mechanic that works in a shop and you can just use your own tools to fix your own car.
Yeah, well, even then you'd be using your shop's tools. I don't think
that's
the
true.
mechanic is going to do an alignment at his house.
That's probably true.
It's an expensive tool. It's not cheap.
I'm sure.
Your balancer is a little bit cheaper, and that's a fun one to use. I've used that a bunch. So that just shows you the wobble on the tire, and that's why they put little lead things on either side of the tire so it balances out. So it drives straight. So yeah, they put it on a machine. It rotates the tire kicks it up, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 miles per hour, and then it judges the wobble, and it will tell you how much weight to put on either side to even it out.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's really easy. Even if your tire is completely balanced, they take off all the weights when they do it. Even if it's completely balanced with no weight, they still put weight on it because it helps prevent a wobble from happening. A little bit of weight on both sides.
Okay, cool. That is something I did not know. All right, well, let's move on now to brake pads and rotors. So these are, once again, things that you'll probably run into as a layman. Your brakes start squeaking, or they start kind of becoming uneven when you press down. You feel your car kind of shake a little bit when you're coming to a stop. Those are issues with either your pads or your brake rotors.
Or your calipers.
Okay. So yeah, Cameron, I know that once that high school class that you took, you had to do some brake pads, right? What's involved in replacing brake pads? How easy is that? What do brake pads look like?
Well, if you have disc brakes versus drum brakes, one is way easier than the other. So
which one's which?
Discs are much easier than drums to replace. Just so you know, all front wheel drive vehicles that have disc brakes in the rear also have a drum brake for the parking brake. It's just a really small drum that they created for that. So for drum brakes, you need a special tool, and there's a bunch of different basically springs and how it works. And unless you've done it a bunch of times, it's really hard to change. Disc brakes, on the other hand, are way easier. It's like the brakes on a bike. Basically, two pads push against the rotor or the wheel in the bike, and that slows it down, which is really easy to change out because you just take the wheel off, and then you can pop out the pads, detach the unit, the pressers at both sides off the car. It's going to have brake fluid in it, but you can just take a C-clamp, put it in there, and slowly turn it, and it will depress the cylinder that's pushing on the pads and put it in your new pads. If the rotor looks good, just put it over the new rotor. If you need a new one, put a new rotor on. You're going to want to scratch the new rotor so it doesn't glass up, because if it gets too hot before it has little scratches on it, it can actually turn to glass, and then you don't break.
Right. Now, so my friend did this for me, and I was there helping. Well, I was there watching mostly recently, so I saw him put new brake pads and new rotors on my car. So some of the rotors you can buy have essentially holes in the metal, so that doesn't, so it essentially they don't heat up as much.
They don't heat up as much. Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty easy for you to do it yourself. I really don't think it's that hard. Once you've watched YouTube, if you're good at watching and then doing, it's pretty easy, and it's way cheaper to do yourself versus to take it to a mechanic. If you're looking at costs, I find it way easier to do as long as you have the tools.
Right. Now the tools are what it comes down to. Sometimes you'll need like a deep socket wrench, things like that, right?
No, just basic tire wrench to take off the.
Come to think of it, what I'm thinking of when my friend helped me, he was also replacing the shocks on my vehicle, and that's when we needed other tools. So
you need another tool, and then you have to have a shock containment thing, which is really scary.
Because that loads the shock, you mean?
Yeah, because you have to compress the shock and then you take out the thing, and if that thing goes,
you got problems. Well,
that's a really scary, dangerous thing to do. So unless you have the right tools, do not replace your shocks.
Yeah. It turns out we bought shocks that were already loaded, so you literally it was just package. You take the packet, the ones that are out, and put the new ones in, and you don't have to load the shock. It's already loaded. Everything is really it wasn't that hard.
Okay.
Anyway,
Because
well,
the ones that I did, we had to take it out. We had to screw down the shock,
sure,
then
right.
take the bolts out, pull out the piston, and then put the new one in. And
Yeah, that's a lot harder.
it's a scary thing because if you don't put that thing in just right, I can't remember how much pressure that you have to. It's an extreme
a lot.
amount. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, shocks are not something we're going to recommend you do it yourself. My friend had done shocks before, and like I said, we weren't even dealing with shocks that Cameron said you have to like do piece by piece because those are scary. This was just here's a new shock, put the whole new, like literally just a couple of extra bolts that we had to take off and put back on, and it was really not a huge deal, though I wouldn't have done it without him anyway. Anyway, but back to brake pads and rotors, like Cameron said, it's really not that bad. I hesitate to say I would have done it myself without my friend who'd done it a lot of times and had the know-how, but it is something, having seen him do it, I'd be potentially willing to do myself, because like Cameron said, if you have a bike and you see how bike brakes work, it's a very similar idea with, and so
Well,
with
and
car
now that
brakes.
people have listened to the description on a podcast, they should definitely be able to handle it.
Like I said,
Well, they
watch a
can-
YouTube video.
Exactly.
It's not that bad. The thing that you have to be the most careful is when you're pushing the piston back, because if you do it too fast, you'll shoot the brake fluid back into your that holds the brake fluid, and then it'll get all over your roof of your car and on your engine and stuff like that, and create a mess. So that's the biggest problem. So
Yeah.
just do it slowly.
So once again, if you do not want to do it yourself, if you just want new brake pads in general, brake pads usually have some metal built in where as they wear down, they start squealing or squeaking when they are worn down enough that they need to be replaced. And so that's when you know you need new brake pads. If you're not sure, obviously, you should be able to take it to the mechanic, and they should be able to tell you how much grip is left on your brakes. Once again, that's a real easy thing to, if you pop the tire off, you can see it right away. You can be like, oh yeah, that's actually got a lot of meat left on it. And so they can tell you like, oh yeah, you've got like 40% of your brakes left or whatever. Now, when you're braking and it feels uneven, if there's some jerkiness when you brake, that's probably your rotor, in which case your rotors are not even. They're not, they've got some bumps to them or something like that, in which case you might need a new rotor, which should help so that you're not shaking when you stop.
Or if you want to go to like an auto pot shop store, if you have two cars or something like that, some auto pot shop stores, I think like I can't think of the name, but one of them will actually turn your rotors for you for free. It doesn't take very long, and that will bring it back to new. Just
Okay.
so you
know. Yeah, that's good.
And your average brake pad, I just Googled it, says between 25 to 65, but the average is about 40,000 if you go to the meet for that. So,
okay.
So,
and if people want to, I know that you get stuff put on your car, and you're like, I don't remember the mileage that it was at when I got it put on. So how am I supposed to remember 40,000 miles? Like, generally people put between 10 and 15,000 miles on their cars yearly. Now, you might be well above the average or below the average, but figuring out what you do yearly might help you be able to put into perspective, like, okay, I'm going to need these replaced in 3 years or something like that.
Also, if you have the manual to your car, most manuals have in the back of the book when you do maintenance. So you can actually write it down and be like, I changed it at this time, this date, and this many miles. So
yeah, that would be really useful. And like I said, so when you get an oil change, people, the shop will put a sticker on your window that says replace it at this mileage. Those types of things. You can do that yourself if you are thoughtful like that. Okay, let's move on to the last thing here before we wrap up. And okay, two other things I wanted to touch on before we finish up. So first one, we've been talking about this a lot, but mechanic versus do-it-yourself is something that there's a lot that goes into this. It's a complicated calculus as far as do I have the time? Do I have the money? Do I have the confidence in my ability? Like Matt said to begin with, do I have this? Would I get a sense of fulfillment by doing it myself, figuring it out myself, versus I need this vehicle. I need it to not break on me. I need it for a long time, so I'm going to take it into a shop. Now, a big part of this calculation, though, is who's the mechanic you're going to, what is the trust level, what is the, you know, are you getting a good deal? Are they recommending a lot of things that don't actually need to be done? Now, how do you guys find, Cameron and Matt, mechanics that you trust?
That is a great question. Google and things like that are a decent start, but even asking a person you trust, who they trust, that can be a way to get started. We recently moved, and when we came into our new area, we were at a different store, just getting basic supplies, and I just asked the cashier, "Hey, we just moved here. Can you recommend a mechanic?" And he said, "Yes, it's at the store right nearby." I said, "Great," and that is literally what I went with. I did look them up. They seemed to have good reviews, and we took our car there, and yeah, I was pretty satisfied with the service. But, I feel like I looked into that one. That said, ask people. Just ask around. Who do you trust?
Yeah, that's great. Other things, like if you just going kind of back to the tire thing, like if you go to Big O, they're known for tires, but they also do other things like that. Think about, is it a national chain, something like that? Wherever you go, are you going to be able to? They'll accept the warranty from your mechanic from the other place. Stuff like that is a good kind of thing to also think about. So if you get something done on your car and then it breaks in a different state, if you can go to that same place, they're going to honor the warranty, whatever they did on the car for you. So
yeah, that's good. I second what Matt said also with asking for recommendations. I do think it's important, and now this probably isn't as much the case for oil changes or little fixes here and there, but anytime they start recommending more expensive fixes, even if you've been to them a few times before, it's probably worth your time to get a second opinion. You can look at a mechanic kind of like a doctor. It doesn't mean that you don't think that they're right, but it's sometimes useful, especially as a layman, as someone that wouldn't necessarily know whether or not you need a new rack and pinion, to say, okay, I'm going to go check over here too. And maybe you don't even tell them that if you don't feel comfortable. You say, okay, well, I'll bring it back tomorrow if I decide that I want that service. And then you run it to the place across the street or down the road or whatever, and you say, okay, guys, I've been recommended to have this done, or I have this issue, and let them diagnose it themselves and see if they come up with the same diagnosis. Because if you're going to be burying,
a couple $1,000.
Yeah, if you're going to be burying like $2,000 or whatever into the car maintenance, or $1,500 or whatever it might be, and you're going based on this one guy or girl or whoever it is that you've known, like you've had 3 interactions with in your life, and they just told you, oh yeah, it's going to be $1,500 to fix your car. Like, okay, well, that's a lot of trust to have. So might as well take an extra 2 hours out of your life and say, okay, I'd like this person that I don't know to also independently verify that I need a new rack and pinion, I need a new control arms, because maybe I do kind of need those things. I don't think that most mechanics are out there lying, but I do think often they look at something and they think, oh yeah, he could replace that. Well, he could replace that and he needs to replace that are sometimes different. And if you're on a budget and you don't have $1,500, you need to know the difference. You need to know, like, okay, is this a nice to have type of, like, sometime in the next year? Or is this you need to do this now because otherwise you're going to have, issues, safety issues even. And that's what the second opinion is going to give you, is that surety that, like, oh yeah, like I actually do need that. And so even if you're trying to save money, a second opinion could give you a different price. But even if you're pretty happy with the mechanic and you're okay spending maybe an extra $100 or whatever because you know that you like their work, still get that second opinion to make sure that they're telling you what you believe that you need. Like if you want to fix all the nice to haves on your car and you have that disposable income, maybe you just go with it. But most people, that's not necessarily the case. And you need to know the difference between I need to have this versus I could have this done. Because cars are always going to wear down over time, and all these parts could be replaced, but what you need to replace is sometimes different than what the recommendation that you might get from the mechanic, which, and once again, their financial incentive is to tell you what you could fix, because sure, it could be fixed, but does it need to be fixed? How urgently does it need to be fixed? Those are questions for your wallet. And so you want to do things that are safe, that make sense for your car, but that's once again why you go take it to another mechanic, give them the opportunity to tell you the same thing, and then you're like, okay, then I need to make the time and make the money for that fix.
That investment.
Yeah. So that's how I do it, because I had a mechanic that I said the words rack and pinion a couple of times. I had a mechanic that I've been going to for a little while. We thought they were pretty good, but then they started recommending all these expensive fixes, and they recommended a $2,000 fix to a car that I think is worth about $2,000. And I was like, I don't think that's something I need to do. But they told me that a couple of times. They're like, you need to have this done. So I took it to my friend, he wasn't comfortable doing that. A rack and pinion is like a full drivetrain type of issue.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not going to do that, but he's like, I can at least look at it and tell you what I think. And he's like, there's absolutely no way you need that done. He said, what they're talking about are these two boots at the end that connect your tie rod to your control arms. He's like, you can fix those for $50. And he's like, I can do that fix because you don't actually need to detach anything. It's like, if we fix those, there's nothing else wrong with this. And they had recommended $2,000 and he fixed it for $50. So that's like a scenario where you're like, okay, they lost my trust there. I went back to one other time. They recommended another $1,500 fix for what I went back to my other friend, and he's like, hey, actually, it's a loose piece of plastic. Give me a zip tie. He zip tied it. It stopped making the noise, and that was that. So go get that second opinion. It's worthwhile. It's find a mechanic that you can trust generally, but if you start going for expensive fix, take that extra hour and make sure that it's that fix that you actually need to have.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And that's how sometimes mechanics lose business. Pushing those expensive fixes that don't need to happen. So.
Okay, last thing before we wrap up, Matt and Cameron, we've got, let's say you've got a car, let's say it's old. At what point do you decide, hey, I need a new car?
When it no longer runs.
Okay.
So everyone has a different philosophy about this. Some people do it based on ownership cost, and the expected increase in maintenance costs over the years. Some people do it based on the fact that I want to drive whatever is new. And some people do it based on the fact that buying a new car is hard, and I don't want to do that unless I absolutely have to. That one is me. And so our philosophy is we drive our cars into the ground until they are visibly no longer safe. But I do not recommend everyone do this. This is just our personal look at it. And obviously, if your car is not safe and you can tell, and a qualified professional is telling you that, yeah, don't do this. Don't drive it. Either repair it or replace it. And at some point, you're going to get to the point to where you are going to have a $2,000 repair on a $2,000 car, and then you need to weigh the value options there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the last two,
my first car that I had titled in my name, we drove until it would no longer start. So
nice.
It was a Pontiac Grand Prix, and it was awesome, and I missed it. But I think what finally killed it was the battery cables corroded, and it wouldn't start anymore. And that, on top of the many other failures of subsystems throughout that car over the years, it finally died after many years of faithful service. Probably too many years of faithful service.
Right. Cameron, what do you do?
I was going to say, the last 2 times I've gotten new cars, it's because my old car got totaled. So
Got totaled by you, I believe.
no, one got totaled by me by a freak accident, and we won't go into that. The other one was because a work truck ran into my car.
Oh, right. I do remember that. Okay.
So, and I still miss that other car. Not going to lie.
Right.
I do not recommend that's the reason you go out and shop for a new car, but those happen to be the reasons why I have gotten new cars the last 2 times. Also, when you're getting a new car, you are the one that's spending the money. Don't let any salesman pressure you or into getting the car if you are not ready, or you tell them, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do today. If they don't listen to you, I recommend just walk out and leave. Who cares?
Right. For sure.
I was with my wife. She had worked with this car company that we went to, and this guy was just trying to sell us on this car that I didn't want to get at that time. I was like, I'm not buying today. I'm just looking. I want to look at a couple other things, and would not listen to what I was saying. So I just got up and walked away. And then I was like, no, we're leaving now. And she's like, well, why? We're just being nice. They're going to come back with another offer. And I'm like, no, I don't care. They're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm like, I'm not buying today. So
yeah. Car salesmen can be quite pushy. So to kind of talk about what both of you just said, I have not. Well, let's see. I purchased a car 4 years ago, but that was because my family grew and I needed a bigger one, so that required that. But I do think that as you're getting to that point where Matt talked about, where like you're like, this might not be safe anymore, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna need a new car really pretty soon. That's when I recommend start shopping then for a new car, so because you can. If you go into the dealership or whatever, but what I like to do is I start shopping online, because then you can also make it like a value proposition. Because if you've been looking for a couple weeks and you see something pop up and you're like, that's what I want, it's a really good deal. I know I have a limited amount of time with my current vehicle, and this is a good deal for the type of car I want. Then all of a sudden you've made it like this the perfect timing, because you've been looking at it for a while, as opposed to waiting until you're backed into a corner or you're at the dealership and they're yelling at you to buy the car and you're like, I hate this, versus like taking that pressure off, being like, okay, I've probably got 2 months or 3 months until my car kicks the bucket. Let's spend that time like looking online, setting up a search, getting updates on it, and saying, okay, like this is my price range, this is what I'm looking for. Let's see if I can find something that pops up that's a good deal that in the next month or two, and if not, I can change my parameters if we start getting closer. But and that's a way that all of a sudden you can make it a question of good buying practices as well. So
yeah, and that's also when, if you do have a good mechanic, comes into play too. If you're not buying from a dealership, buying from something else, take that car to your mechanic, have them look it all out, have them check it everything really thoroughly, because just let them know, you're like, I'm thinking about buying this car, just want you to look over it really well, and they'll do that.
That is certainly worth doing, right?
I mean, it might cost you, maybe $50 for them to check it, but I mean, if that $50 saves you making a big mistake down the road, and some mechanics won't even do that, so
right.
I mean, they'll do it for free, not charge you. That's what I mean.
Right.
But take it
fully
to them,
agree.
get it looked at.
Yeah. So I look at, like, when I'm shopping for cars, I sometimes do look at like the classifieds, but I also look at like is it cars.com or what, some of those websites where they'll bring up some of those classified offers, but also bring up ones from the dealership, because some dealership offers are better. Because if you take into consideration that they're going to give you like a warranty, or they're going to give you the comfort of knowing, like, okay, this has been looked over and stuff like that. It's probably worth the time, worth a little bit of extra money. So
the last car that we did buy, was actually to replace, and we did buy it slightly before it, died. But I mentioned we moved recently. We moved cross country, and we needed a car that was going to be able to safely make that drive. And we'd been told that the best time to buy a car is right about at the new year, because all the dealers are trying to liquidate their stuff. And we actually ended up finding our car. I think it was through either cars.com or Auto Trader, but it was one of those dealership deals. We went over to the dealer, checked it out. It was by far the best one that we had test driven, met all the requirements, and we got a pretty good deal on it. So yeah, absolutely do the shopping, be considerate of when the deals are going to be, and use that time to determine what you want. If we had waited until our faithful Santa Fe had actually died, we would have been in a much more difficult position trying to replace that car with a move imminent,
Right.
and that would have been no fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take your timing into consideration.
Yeah.
Okay.
One last little thing. If you see a car with really low miles and it's really cheap, do a Carfax on it. The last time I was looking for a new car, we had a bunch of cars that had been shipped, and the warranty has been voided on them because they were in floods. So they looked brand new, but they were, from one of the flooded things. They shipped them out over here to Utah, and we're selling them super cheap. But yeah, look at that. Make sure you know what you're getting into, because a lot of those cars had electrical problems and other things like that. Go fig, when the car gets covered in water, has problems. So weird. So
okay. Well, I think that'll take us to the end of this podcast. I hope you guys have had things put in a new perspective for you, giving you some things to think about with your current situation, giving you some insights. So come back and listen to us again next podcast. We'll see you then.